We've arrived at our final unit of AP World Modern, and that's Unit 9, Globalization. Just like Unit 7, Global Conflict, and Unit 8, Cold War and Decolonization, this will encompass the period of 1900 to the present. So this is all part of Era 4. Now our first task is to understand the demographic and population shifts that occur within this time. Now, the 20th and 21st centuries have seen an explosion in the human population. Europe's population doubled between 1850 and 1900, and this obviously is going to put pressure on rural land to produce enough food, but also tremendous pressure on urban housing. This growth helped cause massive immigration to the Western Hemisphere and contributed to the reinvigoration of the Atlantic economy. Now, over in Europe, it also helped lower labor costs and increase consumer demand because more labor equals lower pay. Many educated Europeans were divided on the issue. Some really saw the economic benefits of the rising population, while others were concerned that relentless increase would lead to disaster, as you see on the map here. These concerns derive from the theories of Thomas Malthus, who argued that unchecked population growth would lead to disaster because the population would outstrip available resources. He saw Europe's future as one in which mothers would destroy or expose many of their children, that parents sell their daughters, and that there should be such a number of robbers. He took a very drastic view of what was going on. Now, the baby boomers inherited a world where the concerns of Malthus were actually kicked to the curb because industrial and agricultural production would add an abundance of food and resources. A number of factors combined to slow population growth in developed, that's developed countries by the late 1960s. And that would be the expansion of female employment, the delay of marriage, and effective family planning. The number of births was sufficient enough to simply maintain the current population. Birth control, such as the pill, aided in this process. Now, this transition did not take place in the Third World, and leaders of some developing nations encouraged population growth as a means of increasing national power. Industrialized nations raised concerns about the population growth of developing Asian, African, and Latin American countries. And that understandably led some of these leaders to question how much of a factor race played in the process. These arguments tempered Western arguments that favored birth control, but various economic crises of the 1970s and 1980s exposed the vulnerabilities of developing nations and made them reverse their policies that called for population growth. Mexico encouraged fertility, and the population grew by 3% each year. However, Mexico began to reject these policies in the 1980s and promoted birth control, so their annual growth fell to about 2.3% per year and 1.7% by the 1990s. So the demographic shifts really vary based on developed and so-called developing worlds. Now, the total growth of world population began to slow down a bit in the 1980s, but each year the total population increased a total of, it increases a total of the U.S. population every 3 years. If fertility remained at this constant rate, then we'd reach 50 billion people by the year 2150, or 2.5 children per woman. However, given that fertility rates are already falling in many developing nations, and in the case of Japan and some nations of Western Europe, fertility levels are so low that only immigration will help them increase. The Swedes have actually tried to promote fertility with cash payments, with tax incentives, and generous family leave from work. So the number of births per woman is 1.4. It's 1.39 in Japan and 1.2 in Italy. Life expectancy has certainly improved and plays a role in this. And in industrialized nations, the combination of abundant food, improved hygiene, and effective medicines and medical care have combined to improve life. 20% of the population of developed countries was 65 plus in the year 2000, and that's expected to rise to fully 1/3 by 2050. Immigration has slowed this process in the United States. The median age in Europe will be 52 by 2050, while it will be 35 in the US. And this also brings a host of additional problems, such as how to care for an aging populace with services that may eventually become unsustainable. So in the population charts here, we see distribution, male and female, and then age-related. India, not the best quality of life, or people don't live as long. It's the opposite in Japan. Former communist nations are also facing lower fertility rates, as birth rates are actually lower than death rates. Fertility rates have fallen as low as 20 to 40% since 1975, and abortion is actually extremely common in much of Eastern Europe. The life expectancy for Russian men is 57, which is 10 years lower than it was in 1980. And most of the former Soviet bloc is experiencing high unemployment, low incomes, food shortages, and the dismantling of the former social welfare systems that did at least help prolong life expectancy. So all these factors have led to this decline in life in the former Soviet bloc. In developing countries, we have the opposite. According to projections, Africa's population will be 3 times larger than Europe's by the year 2025. At the turn of the 20th century, Muslim nations had a birth rate of 42.1 per 1,000 inhabitants, and that's higher than the 13.1 that you see in Western nations. India and China accounted for fully 1/3 of the world's population despite efforts to halt this trend. And China famously introduced its one-child policy in 1979, and this had the unintended consequence of female infanticide, especially in rural areas where a son would be likely to take over the farm. India's policies of forced sterilization also caused outrage. Muslims, the illiterate, and lower castes were disproportionately sterilized, and the methods varied by region, but 11 million were forcibly sterilized in a 21-month period of time, and 1 million received IUDs. This was unhygienic and barbaric, but it has the side effect of the birth rate fell from 48 to 34 per 1,000 inhabitants. So this time frame certainly has seen a massive shift in not only where people are living, but where children are now born.